Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this webinar hosted by the Bank of Israel as part of our technological consultation for the digital shekel. My name is Elliot Oster, and I'm a research assistant to the Deputy Governor and member of the Digital Shekel project team here at the Bank of Israel. And it's my pleasure to serve as your host today. Please note that we are recording this session, and we intend to post it on the bank's website in the coming days for any of you who weren't able to make it. We're thrilled to have so many of you joining us here to contribute to the ongoing work of the Digital Shekel project, and specifically to this exciting new phase we're now entering, the technological consultation process. Today's session is designed to give you clarity on the bank's goals for this process, share key insights from the project team, and open up a space for your questions and feedback. So here's what you can expect over the next hour and a quarter. We'll begin with opening remarks from the Deputy Governor, Andrew Arbir. Then we'll move on to Yoav Sofer, the Digital Shekel project manager, who will give an overview of the Digital Shekel project and the technological consultation process, what we're asking from respondents, and how your input will be used. Next, we'll hear from Vincent Meal, a consultant to the Digital Shekel project, who will walk us through each of the 6 technological consultations, where he'll dive into the technological components, the important principles that must be adhered to in designing and building them, and what we're expecting from all of you in each one of them. Hopefully by that point, Yoav and Vince will have answered many of the questions you had coming into today's session. But if not, we'll then open the floor for a live Q&A session. So if you have questions at any point, please feel free to submit them in the chat. We'll be collecting them throughout and try and address as many of them as time allows. So let's get started. It's now my pleasure to invite the Deputy Governor of the Bank of Israel, Andrew Arbir, to open up the webinar. Andrew, over to you.
Thanks, Elliot, for those words. Good afternoon to everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you to open up this webinar. At its core, a central bank digital currency is simply another payment system. It serves as a mechanism to store a balance and to transfer balances from one user to another, essentially to make a payment. There's nothing particularly complex about it. However, the global interest in CBDCs has been significantly driven by the emergence of new technologies, which have sparked the imagination of many regarding the future of financial systems. Several years into this exploration, there is still no definitive answer on the extent to which innovations like distributed ledger technologies can truly enhance the movement of money and the operation of financial infrastructures. But this is just one aspect we aim to deepen our understanding of through the technological consultation that we launched 10 days ago. In the beginning of March, we published the preliminary design for the digital shekel system. Our design aimed to be technologically agnostic as possible. We focused on what the digital shekel would do, who it would serve, its functionalities, and the ecosystem without delving into the how. Where we developed architectural thinking, we kept it at a logical rather than technology level. Some found it surprising that given the proven track record of Israel's technological sector and academia, we were not also exploring the frontier of technology possibilities. However, this was a strategic decision aligned with our priorities and resource constraints. If you've reviewed the design we published, you'll see that it is much more than a simple ledger of balances and transactions. It's a complex system designed to support a wide user base with various use cases under stringent requirements for performance, security, and privacy, and in a manner that will support innovation, and most importantly, in my view, competition. At the same time, they must be inclusive, offering every Israeli the possibility to transact with digital money that is safe and reliable. This is getting ever more important with the wave of financial fraud incidents we've been seeing recently throughout the world. To be able to make an informed decision on launching this complex system, if we decide to do so, we cannot remain technologically agnostic forever. We need to explain what the most advanced technologies can offer, how best they can be utilized in such a system, understand the technology feasibility of our vision, and begin assessing the potential costs of building and operating it. And to do this, we need you, the experts and those with experience in the field, from Israel and abroad. For this consultation, the project team has broken down the design into 6 main components, which will be explained shortly. We welcome your responses to any part of the consultation where you've developed a technology or are offering a relevant solution. The team will soon explain the process, what you can expect from the consultation, and how it may progress. I'll conclude by saying that I'm confident that the benefits of this process will be mutual. For the Digital Shekel project, which will gain a comprehensive understanding of the technology feasibility of the design, and for you, the respondents to the consultation, who will have the opportunity to see how your technologies align with the policy and design decisions of a central bank, and may even test your solutions against real-world requirements. On behalf of the bank and the Digital Shekel Steering Committee, I wish to thank you for your work and your willingness to contribute and participate in this consultation process. I wish you an interesting and productive webinar. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. Now I'd like to invite Yoav Sofer, the Digital Shekel Project Manager, who will give us an overview of the Digital Shekel project and then walk us through the goals behind the technological consultation process, what the bank is seeking from participants, and how your insights will feed into the next stages of evaluation. As a reminder, if you haven't already, you can begin submitting your questions in the chat. Yoav, over to you.
Thank you very much, Elliot, and thank you, Deputy Governor, for these kind opening remarks. This is really a very exciting moment for us, and we're very happy that all of you are spending your time with us today, and also for your willingness to support our process down the road. Let me just take a second to share my presentation, please. Okay, so I'll be spending the next 15 minutes or so in trying to walk you through a background to why we're doing this and what exactly will be the procedure for this process. This is actually part of a very long journey. The Bank of Israel has been studying the topic of CBDC for quite a while. Specifically, the Digital Shekel project began in 2020, and it was termed and still is called an action plan, because we should emphasize that there is no decision as of now at the Bank of Israel that we will launch a digital shekel. And the main purpose of the project is to make sure that we are prepared for launching one if a decision is taken, and I'll show in a minute when such a decision may be taken. Along the project, we've done some technological experiments that did simulate aspects of a real-world digital shekel, some in-house and some with partners. However, we have not really researched any technologies very deeply. And our work has been, as the Deputy Governor said, pretty much technologically agnostic. We did not signal any technologies, and we did not choose any technologies by which the digital shekel would be implemented down the road. And this was also the case during the writing of our preliminary design document, which we made available some 2 months ago. The design is mainly business oriented. It speaks about the ecosystem and the governance structure and the use cases, but it does not signal any one technology or another. However, it seems that the time for being technologically agnostic is over for us, because by the end of 26, our work, according to our work program, we're supposed to submit a recommendation document to our management whether or not to proceed with issuing a digital shekel. And if we want to do that, we need to know some more about technology. So we're doing this process because we want to deepen our understanding on and get a more comprehensive knowledge regarding actually the technological feasibility for implementing our design, or perhaps parts of it. We want to know what are the available technologies out there today, and what will be available in the coming years, because it will take some time to build the digital shekel, and hopefully it should stay with us for more than just a few years. So we need to be aware of what's available now and what will be available down the road. We also need to get some assessment regarding the cost of implementing these technologies and these solutions, because this will be part of our decision-making process, actually. And all of this will lead us towards a decision-making foundation, making us more capable of getting an informed decision regarding a potential issuance of the digital shekel. So for that, we need to learn from you. And when we say you, we mean all of you. We mean, for example, you could be individuals, maybe specific experts, consultants, or people from the academia who have been thinking about some frontier algorithm that may use some elements or some workflows of the digital shekel system. You may be a small company which has an evolving solution that maybe is not even mature yet and could serve part of all of the components of the system that we are designing and maybe building. And of course, you may be a large enterprise. Some of you, we know, even have already ready to deploy full stack CBDC systems, and you may be responding to all of the consultations that we are putting out within this process. However, please don't stick to the dogmatic fashion of this slide. You could be a professor telling us how to build the whole thing. You could be a large company which has just thought of the newest algorithm that we could think about. So we invite all of your responses. I would now like to give some background about the Digital Shekel project. And for that, I often like to start with actually setting the ground clear on what exactly we mean by a CBDC. And we have kind of a typical answer for that. When we say that the public can actually access two types of money, cash and bank accounts. Bank accounts are, of course, digital, whereas cash is physical. You need to be in physical proximity in order to make a payment with cash. However, cash does have an advantage, which is being a central bank liability, whereas bank accounts are a liability of private institutions. So if the public want to make payments with central bank liability, which is digital, they currently don't have a way of doing that. And this is exactly what a retail CBDC would mean, that we would provide the public with the ability to hold and pay with digital central bank liability. By the way, digital central bank liabilities already exist. We probably all know that. And I mean, of course, reserves and settlement accounts at the central bank. And there is a lot of talk in this space and in the industry regarding providing these type of reserves at a more kind of advanced technological manner, which is usually coined or termed wholesale CBDC. We at the Digital Shekel project are trying to think about breaking this fragmentation and thinking in a new perspective, which we call a multi-purpose CBDC. And this is something that's important to take into consideration as you're considering your responses. And if I talk about the previous slide in a bit of a different manner, so today, the two types of central bank money, the retail users can use cash, banknotes, and coins, whereas wholesale financial institutions can operate central bank money on the RTGS system, which has been available for decades in Israel and in other places. If and when we launch a digital shekel, we believe that not only the retail users would be able to access and use it, but along our design work, we have actually come to the conclusion that there are many reasons to think that financial institutions will also need to hold and therefore may also want to use the digital shekel for all sorts of use cases which are within their normal type of business and perhaps within also their future type of businesses. So we may end up with actually two types of digital central bank money, and down the road, we might start asking ourselves, why do we need two types and two systems of central bank money, which is digital? And we may actually converge the digital shekel with the RTGS to what we call a multi-purpose CBDC, a CBDC that could serve both wholesale users and retail users, and in fact, could actually serve a large variety of user base. And if you look at our design document, you will see that we're thinking of all sorts of users for the digital shekel. First and foremost, of course, individuals, by the way, including children, merchants, of course, but not only merchants, also larger businesses operating in the B2B space, financial institutions, as I've mentioned. We think there's an important role for the government as a user in the digital shekel ecosystem, which would actually support creating the network effect and the adoption of end users. And we also see a place for foreigners, individuals, even businesses to use and hold the digital shekel. And we explain in the design document what would be the conditions for that. So each type of these users could actually operate on the digital shekel as a payer, but also as a payee. And we can already imagine how this creates space for a large variety of use cases. So for example, there could be P2P transactions, people buying in grocery stores in P2B, people paying taxes in P2G transactions, maybe the government paying salaries or welfare to people, so G2P transactions. There could be, of course, B2B transactions between businesses and more. So the government could be paying businesses, for example, the government could be paying its suppliers. Businesses could be paying on cross-border transactions, and also could individuals be doing that. and financial institutions also could be making settling transactions within themselves in wholesale manner of central bank money, as well as making transactions with their customers. So, for example, you can think of a merchant acquirer, which settles the transactions of a business at the end of the month, paying the business with digital shekel, or an individual paying the issuer of their credit card the monthly bill of the card in digital shekels. All of this is explained in the design document, and there's actually no reason even to think that there couldn't be transactions between financial institutions and entities abroad. For example, financial institutions could be serving as FX providers in such transactions, or even transactions between foreign individuals and businesses within themselves. There's nothing technical that could prevent that. So, all of this needs to be supported by an ecosystem which we have described in the document. Let me kind of go over it relatively briefly. So there are, of course, end users. I'm not dissecting all of them here in this chart. This is a chart from the document, from our design document. So there are end users that want to make transactions, but they cannot make transactions directly by themselves because they cannot access the backend of the digital shekel on their own. They need to be supported by PSPs who can then operate on the CBDC backend. And PSPs are the most important participant in the digital shekel system. They onboard the end users, they KYC them, and they provide them all of the functionalities to make payments and other operations on the digital shekel system. We also describe the roles of two other types of participants in the document. So there are the ASPs, which do not perform all of the operations that PSPs can. For example, they cannot trigger payment and they do not onboard end users, but they can support all sorts of more innovative use cases and additional use cases for which they need to operate on the backend. And we also use the term funding institutions for entities that currently manage end users' payment accounts. So, for example, they could be banks or e-money institutions that need to be able to operate on the backend as well, because they need to actually support the funding and defunding operations of end users' digital shekel wallets. There are many more entities in the ecosystem that need to be considered. For example, technically, you need to consider the RTGS, which supports the minting and burning of CBDC. There's also a role for the ATM switch, which is explained in the document. And there's kind of a governance structure for the CBDC system, which is actually less a technological issue. But the design document also speaks of the potential for some central service that may be even external to the central bank. For example, a centralized fraud monitoring system and an alias management system that can streamline the user experience of users that can interact with each other using convenient aliases such as a phone number instead of the address on the CBDC backend. And Vince's presentation will delve a bit deeper about the structure and roles of these entities. So it won't be possible for me to go through the whole design document. It's very comprehensive, but I'll just try and emphasize a few things that need to be, that we have kind of identified as important to think about when you're thinking about your solutions and your responses to the consultation. The digital shekel transactions will be immediate and final, and this can sometimes be at tension with values such as consumer protection and AML compliance, which in turn may also be kind of at odds with, for example, supporting privacy and even supporting the capability for anonymous payments, which we speak about in the design document, that could be supported for small amounts and other specific restrictions that would be placed. The digital shekel needs to be inclusive to all and should support innovative features and use cases. And it needs to be, as I kind of explained in the slide of the users, it needs to be universal, so used by everyone, and also symmetric, meaning that anyone can pay anyone, regardless of what type of user you are and what type of, and who your actually provider, who is your PSP, for example. Any transaction, any operation can be done between any two users on the digital shekel system. The CBDC needs to be central bank liability all along the transaction chain and all along the holding of the end users. So never a liability of any other entity but the central bank. And that is true both for online and offline transactions. And I think if the deputy governor was still here, if he hasn't left, he would say that it's important that this digital shekel promotes competition. And for that, it needs to provide relatively low and barriers to entry for the participants in the digital shekel system, because we want a variety of a large amount of participants that can promote competition and innovation. So I think I'll stop here about the description of the digital shekel system and move to kind of explaining you through the procedures, how to respond to the consultation, and what you can expect from it down the road. The first thing you need to do is to start by reading the technological consultation document. It's a bit of a long link here. We can put it in the chat later. You can also scan this QR or Google digital shekel technological consultation. It's important that you get familiarized with this document. It says everything, all of the explanations and all of the content that you need in order to respond to the consultation. It also refers in many places to the original design document. So once again, this is the technological consultation document, which would in turn refer to the design document, and you need to be familiar with both of them. Please submit your responses by no later than June 30. By all means, if you're able to submit them earlier, that would, of course, make our life much easier. What you actually need to submit to us is a Word or a PDF format sent to us by the email, digitalshekeltc@boi.org.il, in English, please. And please make sure that you read all of the disclaimer chapter of the document very carefully and very thoroughly. Even maybe let your legal advisors read this part so you're completely aware of the conditions and the terms and conditions of this process. So how should your response be structured? Begin by actually telling us which technological consultation, which TC you're responding to. By the way, there are 6 of them, as the Deputy Governor said, and you can address one or more of the consultation topics. What we ask is that if, for example, you believe that your product already supports more than one component, please break it down into the different components that we have described. We know it may be a bit complicated, but will be critical for us to be able to discuss the different components. So if you're responding in one email or several email, or in one email that has several documents, or in several emails, please make sure that your response starts by telling us which TC you are responding to. We then need your information, whether you're an individual, tell us a bit about yourself, and whether you're a company. Of course, we also need to have a clear contact information within the company so that we know who we can turn to if there's need for questions or clarifications or anything else. And then, of course, most important is the description of your solution. So what we ask is that you provide an executive summary of up to 2 pages, which will allow us to kind of do the initial screening of the responses that we will get and to analyze them kind of initially before we dive deep into them. And then please detail your description. Please describe your solution over up to no more than 10 pages. I know it will be hard. You can add annexes at the end of your response, but please try to kind of summarize your technology or your solution by up to 10 pages. Where relevant, we also ask that you provide a cost estimation for us to implement your solution. This is, of course, nothing binding, and this is explained in the document, but we are doing a cost-benefit analysis, so we want to get some kind of an idea regarding the cost of implementation of the technologies that you'll be suggesting to us. What can you expect? We should be analyzing doing some initial analysis of your responses by no later than June 30. And then we should be doing some initial analysis of your responses several weeks after we receive them at the June 30 deadline. And then we may actually contact some or all of you for follow-up discussions, clarifications, maybe additional information, invite you for direct meetings, and maybe even ask you to create some presentations or even demos of your technology if you're able to do that. We expect to complete this analysis process, so us reading, analyzing your responses, and then maybe coming back to you for follow-ups by the end of this year. So by the end of the year, we will have kind of absorbed all of the information and analyzed it by reading your responses and or by talking to you or discussing it with you. We may or may not publish an aggregate analysis of the consultations, but anyway, we will not disclose any individual information that you have provided to us, and we'll definitely not do it without prior permission from you. So feel free to tell us whatever you can about your solution. Down the road, we may or may not conduct any proof POCs with some of you. So this is something that we're considering that we may be doing in 2026, but it's hard to commit to this at this point of time as we haven't yet seen the responses and what are the what we will get actually out of this process. But this is something that we're considering, so do bear this in mind. So before I conclude, the Deputy Governor did say that we expect that this would be a mutual benefit for all of us. I think the benefit for the Digital Shekel project from this consultation process would be clear. What's in it for you? First of all, you will get an opportunity to influence our design. And as we make our information public regarding our design, maybe also influence the design of other CBDCs or other systems that are being developed worldwide. You'll get a chance to challenge your solution, your ideas against the requirements of a central bank that's actually designing a CBDC. You, if you want, can make the information regarding your participation in the process, you can make it public and get recognized as a leader in your space. And down the road, as I mentioned, some of you may have an opportunity, if of course you'll be willing, and we'll need to decide about the conditions for that, to conduct POCs together with us down the road. I think I should stop here. Thank you very much. And Elliot, I'll turn it back to you.
Thanks, Yoav. Now I'd like to invite Vincent Meal, a consultant to the Digital Shekel project, who has many years of experience working on technological aspects of financial infrastructures and digital assets. He will guide us through the key technological design considerations underlying the proposed Digital Shekel system and what we're expecting from each technological consultation. I'd just like to say, as we said, the recording of the webinar will be uploaded to the Bank of Israel's website, so will Yoav and Vince's presentations, so they'll be accessible to you later. Vince, over to you.
Thank you very much, Elliot. I will share my screen now. Okay. Very good. So thank you very much for the introduction, and it's a pleasure to be presenting today in front of many names of people I personally know, and also a pleasure to be able to present to those of you that I haven't had the opportunity to meet. Hopefully in the future we will be able to cross paths. I'm here today to focus on dig a little bit deeper in terms of the aspects that you have introduced in terms of some of the roles of the participants, the activities and services that we anticipate the system to do, and sort of explain why we have broken up the technical consultations into the components and services that we have. Sorry. So provide a little bit of context. One of the things that I want to emphasize is that we're exploring all the technological options that are out there. So there's been no presumptions, and if you read something in the preliminary design or in the technical consultations that you think sort of implicitly presume that a technical decision has been made, please don't take that as an assumption, and feel discouraged that something is rigid. Particularly, there has been no decision made in terms of DLT, distributed ledger technology, or not DLT, and no decisions in terms of the technology as to how centralized it will be or distributed, and so on. And I know that does not say anything about governance. This is purely technical aspect. So we are within the context of central bank digital currency and a central bank in the Bank of Israel. This is more about technical centralization or technical distribution more than governance. We know from sort of preliminary investigation and from many years in this space that there is likely no one-size-fits-all solution globally. Every central bank has different considerations. The preliminary design document that the Bank of Israel published goes through a great deal of detail in terms of the options and the requirements that the team is looking for, more so than many other central banks at this stage of the progress. So we know that there are a variety of trade-offs, and technology makes trade-offs in every sense. As you have introduced, things like privacy and anonymity in terms of being able to make anonymous transactions, cash-like transactions are at odds with each other. So a solution may be designed more privacy oriented, and another solution maybe designed more performance oriented, or more catching more fraud and preventing more much more fraud in terms of that balance. So there is no one size fits all solution. So what we're looking for is how the components can fit together in a way that best satisfies the requirements and functionalities that are in that preliminary design document. And let me say, if you do think you have a one-size-fits-all solution that is a full package solution that fits all the requirements, please absolutely tell us so, because we want to know about it and potentially help you tweak it or make it better suited for specific aspects of the design as it goes forward. With that, one of the things I'll emphasize is that when you respond to technical consultations, it will be extremely helpful to the team if you can justify the reasoning of some of the technological choices you made as part of either your academic decisions or your development as a vendor and so on. And the reason for that is because it's helpful to know why you made certain trade-offs. And it's not saying that one product is better than another, but we also are looking for the rationale as of why something was developed a certain way. And I'll go through some of those examples of some of the differences when we go through some of the more specific technical aspects. But it will just be extremely helpful to better understand where your positioning was when you designed it and when you implemented a given piece of technology. And this is also the time, I'll remind you again, we will have a Q&A at the end. Please, as we go through this, if questions come into your head that you'd like us to answer, please put them in the chat and we'll address as many as we can at the end of the session. So the digital Shekel system is comprised of a series of components that allow different members of the ecosystem to interact with each other. Whether that's the bank as the system operator interacting with regulated entities like PSPs, or end users paying one another. We've organized the TCs, the technical consultations, into 6 different consultations with the components that are going to be depicted here, organized in different layers. And the layers start with the digital Shekel infrastructure layer, which is the top layer, where the more centralized services exist, namely where the system operator, the alias management operator, and the fraud management operator exist. And then in the middle, we have participants, and this is where intermediaries exist. So this is where PSPs and ASPs and funding institutions exist who will be serving customers. And then at the bottom, we have end users in the broadest sense. And this comes back to Yoav's introduction of this being a multi-purpose CBDC. So don't imagine users to just be individuals with handheld devices like mobile phones. Users are also very much wholesale users or large institutions doing potentially very large transactions. So the first technical consultation is regarding the backend layer. And this is the layer that everyone sort of traditionally focuses on. This is where settlement occurs, and I'll get into more details about what the backend layer does when we dig in a little bit deeper into it. But ultimately, it's at the top layer, and it's fundamentally, from a governance standpoint, centrally managed, or the components are centrally managed. So the backend layer maybe is operated and serves the purpose of the system operator, and then there'll be additional services and so on. But we have the blue boxes there to indicate sort of where we'd like you to address sort of the interconnections or the scope of where the technical consultation focuses. So it's not just sort of focusing on the settlement engine or the databases, it's also the interaction with the other components that I'll introduce. The second technical consultation is about the communication layer. And this one bears a little bit of explanation that I'll get into when I get to the specific slide. But you can see that it becomes pretty much every permutation of communication between end users and between participants themselves, and then between the components at the top, and then amongst the layers. There will need to be a communication medium between all those components and those services. The third technical consultation is offline capabilities. And this adds this green box to, you can see pretty much all three layers, because all three layers may be implicated in some way, but maybe not at the same time. This is what you traditionally think of offline payments, in which there is no communication ability between end users who want to perform a payment. There's no communication either to not PSPs or not the backend layer or not both of them. So being able to support those payments in a variety of different scenarios, which we'll get into in a moment. The fourth is what we call the authorization layer. This is also can be described as the key management layer or the secured container layer. And we focused on this one specifically because this is where much of the innovation in the space can derive, especially putting the ability for authorization of actions directly at the end user level. And as you see these three levels, it focuses on the communication between the end user and all the way up to the backend layer, potentially where intermediaries cannot modify it. They may not be able to see it, but fundamentally, puts that authentication and authorization at the lowest level possible to ensure that every action is properly authorized, which has its own deep technical and security considerations associated with that when we make that assumption. Separate from, let's say, the core functionality, we have external services or additional services. The first is alias management, which, as you have introduced, is primarily to provide convenience, but also serves an important information segregation duty that I'll describe more in detail when we talk more about the service. But as you can see, it is external to the backend layer because we anticipate that it will not be operated by the same operator as the backend layer, and it is also separate from the PSPs. It'll be a service that will provide information to PSPs and end users. And then additionally, an additional external service is fraud monitoring. Similar to the alias management, it would, especially because of the separation of duties and keeping information on a need and no basis, fraud monitoring and the data that may be used for that would be segregated from the operator of the backend layer and also segregated from individual PSPs, but still provide a service to the PSPs. So these 6 TCs cover the whole ecosystem, and I'll say it again, and I will repeat it again, that this is an overall system, and these components need to work together in order to serve the functions that are in the preliminary design. So this is, definitely not components working in isolation that can just sort of hand things off or make certain assumptions. So keep that in mind as you respond, that to the extent that you can address the way that your technology, if it serves only one of these TCs or only one of these services, describe what the feasibility is in terms of integrating it or making it interoperable with other components and this overall system as a whole. So with that, I will dig deeper into each one of the technical consultations. We'll start with the backend layer, which was at the top of the previous diagram. And the purpose of this is to authorize and record changes to balances in end user wallets. I will highlight the use of terminology here and how that terminology is used in the preliminary design document, and especially regarding the word wallet. Because the way that the word wallet is used in the document is that the wallet is the balance that is in the database, that is as depicted here, that's in the primary database. So sometimes people use wallets in the sense of public blockchains like Ethereum. You think of the wallet as the the key on your phone or on your computer or on a piece of hardware. We've abstracted that out a bit and focus on the value existing in the database that exists at the backend layer. So the wallet is where the value is, and the value is in the primary database. One of the key highlights of the backend layer and of the databases that are depicted here is that we want to be able to do that authorization, recording the changes with the minimum amount of information that's necessary to perform that function. And that is especially because we want to, privacy is one of the primary considerations for the overall system. So the database records the changes, and it works hand in hand with what we call the settlement engine, which would be a stateless component that performs either rule checking or the authorization checking, or performs the logic to determine how information is stored in the database, whether updates or whether balances are updated, and so on. But I will focus on, we know that there are many different ways to implement this structure, and this is a great example of not being specific in terms of technology, and hopefully not implying or even that technology choices have been made here, because what you see on the slide in terms of the databases of information, the settlement engine, and so on, this could be more databases, this could be less databases, this could be an integrated single component that is the settlement engine in the primary database. It could be DLT, which would extend sort of the use of the word database. And that's what I mean. When I say database, I don't just mean a centralized database. It could also be a decentralized database, or just a decentralized ledger or distributed ledger. And the methods in which the sort of checking in these two relatively simple purposes can occur are vastly different. We've seen this implemented even just if we just look at DLT, Ethereum-based models like Besu and Quorum, which are permissioned Ethereum-based solutions, handle the checking of the logic and the checking of the smart contracts, the validation of the transaction and the settlement in the ledger very, very differently than how R3 does with Corda. Despite the fact that they both fall under the umbrella of DLT, the technical assumptions that are made and the methods in which the two perform relatively the same action, updating the balance, checking rules, is vastly different. That leads to dramatically different implications in terms of privacy and performance, and so on, and all the way down the list of all the types of non-functionals here. It's a long-winded way of saying the options are open here, and we're looking for you as the experts in this field to help suggest how to implement this function of the overall system. So some of the important considerations here are privacy, which will come up more than once here. Data management. We've listed here three different, and the preliminary design document goes into detail about what the three databases here actually hold. The participant database, again, I'll point out very specifically, participant in this means the PSPs, the ASPs, and the funding institutions. It does not mean end users. So it is just the intermediary organizations or entities as part of it. The primary database, we anticipated would hold the minimal amount of information, such as a wallet ID, potentially a unique identifier for end users, which is how holding limits could be implemented, but in a way that doesn't tie it directly to the personal information of an end user. So multiple wallets associated with one unique ID from the perspective of the backend layer. Holding limits could be implemented in that way without de-anonymizing the end user. And then also a point of potential contention is the transaction database. Because as the design document goes into detail, there's a desire for aggregated reporting and aggregated information, not on a per transaction level that could implicate privacy considerations, but in an aggregated form, such as this type of user, there were this many transactions that were under 10,000 shekels over this period of time, but not at the individual transaction level that could implicate individuals and individual end users with individual transactions. I talked about the participant database. Interoperability is critically important, and that fits in the overall picture of the system as a whole. This becomes the component. This backend layer becomes the component that almost all other components need to interact with. And some of the functionality. This is not a complete list, but this is some of the highlighted functionality of this is the tracking and enforcement of holding limits, interest payments. Being able to provide interest to the wallets themselves, being able to implement other policies such as rules associated with maybe potentially time-based or conditional payment aspects. How would that fit into this layer, especially the settlement engine and its interaction with the primary database? And then finally, statistical and operational data that the system operator would be able to use to ensure the availability and the reliability of the system. And again, all technologies are considered here. I used a few DLTs as an example, but I'm also aware of some innovations in terms of let's call them centrally managed distributed databases like Tiger Beetle and Foundation DB and others that may provide benefits when you make the assumption that there's a central governing system operator, so not a collection of peers that should be able to opine on the validity of a transaction. Here we have a central bank who will make that decision. But how do you keep track of balances in a resilient way? And that is where distributed databases may come into play and be more interesting than just a singular centralized database in one location. So all considerations to think about. The takeaway I hope is that this is open from a technological standpoint, and we're looking for what your ideas are in terms of the most innovative ways to solve this core function of any payment or financial system. Okay, the second TC is about secure transaction messages and communication. This primarily is about communication between the participants and the infrastructure layer, so the intermediaries and the backend layer at the middle and the top layer from the initial graph, which is shown to the right. This is a flow from all the way from the payor through the PSP, through the backend layer, and then back to the payee's PSP. One thing I'll highlight is you'll note that in the middle there, steps 4 and 4A and 4B and things like that, there's a few different types of messages going on. And one of the key takeaways is that this need-to-know basis of information is important. And the reason why the message from a PSP to the backend may be encrypted is because a different entity or different component than the backend may need that information, but it might be routed through the backend. So if the backend doesn't need to see it, it shouldn't see it. That could be things like the fraud detection system or the alias management system, or communication from one PSP to another. The backend could be the sort of message bus between the two, but the backend shouldn't be able to read that message. Whether that's logical separation or physical separation is a technical choice and up to you. The other communication is from participants to other participants, so PSP to PSP that I just mentioned. And some considerations for the response, for your responses. So what should be the structure of the message? The design document goes into detail about some of the fields we think are necessary. But from a technical standpoint, how would you implement that? Are there any limitations in terms of size, encryption and so on that you might think are important. The other aspect that we'd like we know that there's innovation is the method of transmission. So there's been a lot of paper and dialogue about hub and spoke models, which would be, sort of PSPs communicating through the backend layer and routing. And it would be somewhat like a Swift model in which messages would get centrally routed and then be distributed to where they end up. But there's a tremendous amount of innovation in the peer-to-peer messaging space, being able to build resilient message networks, whether they're DHT-based or else, that can securely transmit messages from one entity to another in a resilient and secure way. So we're looking for that type of innovation, and again, focus on that need-to-know basis concept that permeates all of this. One of the other things in the preliminary design document is that the end users should be authorizing payments or any action at the backend layer via private keys that they have control over, or that they've delegated control over to an intermediary. But ultimately, it's that singular aspect of the private key that provides the authorization for an action or for information from the backend. This also means, in the context of secure messages and transaction messages, that the payment authorization, so the authorization to update the balance in the wallet that is in the core database, which is done by that signature from the private key, that could be different than the message authorization that happens between the communication layers, or between the communication between the parties. So as a primary example of that, if you were to, and it's a desire to implement features like time-based business logic, user and usage-based business logic, external condition-based logic, like 2 or 3 party locks or hash time lock contracts, HTLC requires an out-of-band message between the endpoints of the HTLC in order to share the hash. So that communication, we would like sort of an explanation on how that would happen on such a system, and that's the focus of TC2.
Sorry to be the man with the stopwatch, but you have about 5 minutes left.
Okay, I will speed up then. Thank you very much. Offline capabilities. I see, this is a subset of access technologies. So finality and settlement must be possible offline, as you have said, without deferral. So this is not about deferring messages for settlement later on. This is about making sure that when one end user pays another end user with their devices, the recipient knows that transaction is final and settled. It is final and settled from a technical standpoint. The BIS identifies 3 types of offline payments: fully offline, but we know that there are significant challenges that exist with that, and the preliminary design document specifies that there must be some form of synchronization. So fully offline is probably something that is significantly challenging in the digital shekel realm, but intermittently offline is the primary focus. So whether that's seconds or minutes or days or weeks, especially in disasters, how would an offline system handle that type of intermittent access to PSPs and the backend? Privacy, as you have mentioned, anonymous and non-anonymous payments we'd like to be able to support that. The life cycle of rules and lists is we know a challenge with offline, so the extent you can describe that. Eventual synchronization of data, dispute resolution support. So if a rogue wallet or a rogue payment happens and we end up with 2 parties, maybe 2 innocent third parties in the system that both say they have come back online, how would you resolve that? What type of information does your system have for that? And then interoperability, including micropayments. Okay, secure containers and cryptographic key management. This is about authorization at the backend layer, again, as I mentioned. But one of the things we want to focus on is the entire key management lifecycle. So it's not just the storage, it's not just the usage, but the generation, the distribution, the storage, the installation, the use, rotation, backup, and recovery are incredibly important and should not be overlooked. Revocation, suspension, and destruction of the keys that are on the end user devices that provide that authorization. And these cryptographic keys should be technology agnostic to the backend layer, because they will have to be able to support smartphones, limited functionality phones, smart cards, point of sale terminals, and also cloud-based APIs. Understanding what the best key management technology exists for each of these types of devices and uses is something we want to focus on. Alias management system. We want to enhance and provide an enhanced and convenient user experience, but it also performs an operational role because it onboards end users in a way that allows their personal information to be abstracted away from the backend layer. So the end result is end users using a wallet lookup service through the PSPs in order to send payments that are only based on the recipient's alias. So a digital shekel payment should be able to be made to a mobile phone number. And then finally, fraud monitoring system. One of the things that's in the preliminary design document is that PSPs will remain liable for fraud on the system. And this is to provide additional information to the PSPs that potentially only that centralized system could have access to. So things like patterns and other systemic information, again, with privacy considerations being considered, that the individual PSP may not have access to, but a central system that is operated by an independent party, different than the system operator, might be able to provide. One of the things also point out is discussion of what data is relied upon in order to provide that fraud monitoring. We know, like companies like Chainalysis in the Bitcoin and crypto world, they require a blockchain with full transaction history. And if the digital shekel system doesn't have that entire history, like that, a system like that won't work. So what are the assumptions and what is implied in terms of what's necessary to be needed? And then finally, I will conclude. Thank you, Elliot. I see you're back. I'm probably over my time, but I'll just emphasize digital shekel system is one system with interlinked components. So please remember that these things are not standalone. Please be as detailed and as technical as possible. If you're a vendor, my question to you is, why did you make certain design decisions? Convince us that it's the right decision to make, more than just saying it's secure. Tell us why and how. And we're seeking guidance on individual components or subcomponents, algorithms, and methods to the level of detail that you are comfortable getting into, even the finest minutia. Please include non-functional considerations like security, performance, resilience, and other non-functionals. And as you all have mentioned, this is a feasibility analysis also. So we're looking from costs and maturity from a feasibility standpoint to understand whether or not your technology is able to be implemented. Not just that it's interesting, but it's able to be interested. And really the question at the very end, what is the cutting edge of research and how could it be part of the larger digital shekel system? Thank you very much for your attention.
Thanks, Vince. Now we'll go over to a live Q&A session where Vince and Yoav will respond to the questions you submitted, some of you in the chat, some of you in advance. If you haven't already, please submit your questions via the chat and we will address as many as we can with the time we have left. So for the first question, I'm going to come over to you, Vince. The question is, if we choose to submit our proposal for more than one technical consultation segment, there will be a reduced cost proposal if we can deliver the different segments as part of one program. This is especially true for the ongoing cost. In such cases, can we propose a combined cost proposal?
Absolutely, yes. And that's the type of efficiency that I think we are looking for, especially from the feasibility aspect, to understand where the overlaps are, where the efficiencies can be gained. These are not, despite the fact they are separate technical consultations, they're not mutually exclusive from each other. So feel free to respond to more than one. Feel free to the extent that you can separate them, please do so. But to the extent that they overlap, maybe mark in your response that applies to more than one. But we do want to segregate out because our thinking is about these as components. But please don't be discouraged to respond to more than one.
Thanks, Vince. All right, for the next question, we're going to come to you, Yoav. There are mentions of integration with national databases and information systems. Is there an already defined set of such external sources and their integration mechanisms which we can use for our proposal?
Thank you. Thank you, Elliot. We don't have a closed list of such national data systems. You can consider, for example, and also we don't have a kind of a detailed characterization of how exactly the integration with these systems would work. You can consider, for example, a national population registry, a national companies registry, maybe, for example, data from the passport control in order to identify tourists where they can use the digital shekel during their stay. So this type of national infrastructure, some of them already in Israel actually operate APIs that the banks can use, for example. But no, we're open to understand from you how such integrations can work.
Thanks, Yoav. We'll stay with you for the next couple as well. So the next question is, should there be real-time checks to ensure a person's total CBDC holdings across all wallets with different PSPs don't exceed a set limit? If so, will this require a third party with full visibility or coordination among PSPs?
Yeah, indeed. So the design document speaks about the requirement that it will be possible to enforce holding limits on users per user type. So, for example, you don't need to know that the user is Yoav or Elliot. You do need to know that the user is an individual in order to enforce the holding limit. And indeed, if a user has more than one wallet which is managed by more than one PSP, then you cannot actually have a requirement on the PSPs to fully enforce that. So you need to have some kind of information creation at the backend layer in order to support the ability to enforce those holding limits. So I think the answer to the first question is yes. Whether that would be provided by the backend layer service itself or by a third party, I think is an open question that we're open to hear possibilities about. Of course, that would be it would need to be coherent with the privacy restrictions of the model in general.
Thanks, Yoav. Okay, so the next question to you as well. If interest is paid proportionally to a person's total CBDC holdings, is it assumed that a third party or cross-PSP coordination will be needed to calculate each person's total balance, as in the previous question?
Yeah, so this is indeed a related question, and I'd say the answer once again is yes. So if I have my balance divided between several wallets, the interest rate that the bank should pay me, if interest rate, by the way, is decided to be paid on CBDC holdings, but indeed this is a technological requirement. So the interest to be paid to me should be indeed proportional to my general holding in all of my wallets, except for my offline, by the way. We were assuming that interest would not be paid on balance in offline wallets. So indeed, we were thinking that this would be some kind of a centralized system that is able to calculate all of my holdings and also calculate my earnings. I don't think we were thinking about a cross PSP mechanism here, because this may not be in line with the privacy requirements. So, for example, I may not want PSP1 to know my balance with PSP2, and PSP1 may not want PSP2 to know my business with them. So I think a centralized such a mechanism would be preferred. But once again, I think we can be open to all sorts of options here.
Thanks. Okay, final question to you, Yoav. Is the Bank of Israel or the technological consultation respondents planning or permitting TC2's API and message architecture to be based on Israeli open banking standards, reusing existing investments and infrastructure?
Yeah, so open finance infrastructure is a possibility. So I think to say that we're considering it, we are among other possibilities. So this is definitely something that could be proposed, and we're happy to hear about the advantages and disadvantages of this mechanism as opposed to others. But definitely something to be considered.
Great, thanks, Yoav. Now we're going to come back to you, Vince, for another question. Question for you is, do you consider implementing ZKP to enhance privacy?
Yeah, I mean, zero knowledge proofs are, again, one of those cutting edge technologies that I think are very innovative. I would say be mindful of the trade-offs with them. So in terms of performance, in terms of what they may shield and from whom and things like that. But it is definitely something that I think is worth further exploration. And to whoever asked that question, help put zero knowledge proofs into the context of a multi-purpose CBDC. I think that's what my ask would be. Given the considerations that are in the preliminary design document, and the trade-offs, amongst the different considerations.
Thanks, Vince. We'll stay with you for the next one as well. Do you consider post-quantum encryptions to protect from future quantum breakthrough?
Yes, absolutely. And I think the vulnerability of many of the algorithms, particularly around signatures, is paramount. So one of the things, and the reason why we mentioned in terms of the cryptographic key management and TC and so on, is we want to know what algorithms you recommend and the trade-offs amongst those algorithms. We know, of course, NIST has gone through their process, but if there are reasons to use the NIST recommended algorithms or not, please explain where they would fit in. And again, think of this as an entire system. So, a post-quantum algorithm used at the back end might be easier to implement than something on a point-of-sale terminal or a smart card or a limited functionality phone. So it's all trade-offs, and the more that you can draw out those trade-offs, I think the better we will be.
Thanks, Vince. We're going to come back to you for the next one as well. What are the security requirements for the bridge to the offline solution?
Yeah, so this is, the bridges, and the word bridge is a very loaded term because of that's the primary vulnerability in many of the public blockchains, bridges between two systems. But here we have the bridge here would be two systems operated by the Bank of Israel, by the system operator. So it changes I think the security dynamic a little bit. Ultimately, the preliminary design document goes into detail about how a suggested method of the offline system can work in just that the balance of all offline tokens would sort of be held in an omnibus account. And I'm paraphrasing, I think, what the preliminary design document says, but the bottom line is that it doesn't need to be a fully autonomous smart contract linked type of bridge that is vulnerable to sort of running out of control. It can be something a little bit more managed and supervised and slowed down a bit for that. The other aspect I'll point out, sorry, this is a good opportunity to also say this. I've seen implementations for offline that try to tie it too much into the online system. So things like they have an online DLT system that they will then try and do the same signatures and the same transactions in an offline fashion, and then bring those transactions back onto the online system. That's one method of doing it. It may be too complicated, and it might not be the most efficient way of doing it. So having essentially two parallel systems, still all the digital shekel, it's still all the same CBDC, but offline system that allows transactions between offline wallets, standing alongside the online system, is something that is also worth exploring. So please don't take the bridge as meaning that it has to be a full technical bridge, and with a whole bunch of technical and security considerations associated with it. It has to be secure, but doesn't have to be tightly technically integrated.
Okay, Vince, and we'll come with you to your last question for you. How will the settlement engine work with the aggregate database mentioned in the concept paper?
I would say they don't have to work together. They could, but they don't have to. The aggregate database, as mentioned in the concept paper, I think was just used for reporting or so. But it certainly, I guess it could be used for ongoing system-wide monitoring, and I'm being very careful, not individual transaction monitoring, but if there's an anomaly happening on the system-wide level, maybe you could throttle the settlement engine down and do it. So the settlement engine is meant to be a simple concept that performs a complex task. In that becomes the settlement engine is the gatekeeper for the updates to the database. So to the extent that you may have suggestions in terms of how the settlement engine or how rules could be written in a way that the settlement engine enforces that uses the aggregate database, I would leave that to the respondents to make suggestions on.
Thanks, Vince. Yoav, we're going to come back to you for another question. The question is there a prioritization or phased rollout strategy? For example, online only first, offline later?
Thanks, Elliot. There isn't one yet, but there will be one. If you look at the introduction to the design document, you will see that we are speaking of doing some kind of prioritization down the road. For now, we need to consider the whole big digital shekel product that we have described in the design document, in the consultations document. If and when we decide to implement, there will be a prioritization strategy, which we will probably form next year, but we don't have one at this point of time.
Thanks, Yoav. Another question to you. Is there also a need for consultation services for the relevant TCs, or is the focus on the technological solutions alone?
I guess it depends what you mean by consultation services. We're happy to get, information, knowledge, explanations regarding possible solutions. So for example, if you have not developed a solution, but you want to propose one, I think it's okay for you to respond to the consultation. We are not looking for, for any additional consultancy services at this point of time.
Thanks, Yoav. And another one to you. Does the Bank of Israel want the shekel and the digital shekel to coexist, or eventually will only a CBDC be used?
Yeah, the digital shekel is a shekel. It's another technological form of the shekel, and it will sit alongside all existing types of money, so cash, bank accounts, and existing means of payments such as credit cards and others. So it's coming as an addition to the system and not replacing anything. At least not in the beginning. Down the road, as I explained, maybe the digital shekel and the RTGS will kind of converge, but once again, not pushing any of the existing services out of the economy.
Okay, great. And the final question to you, Vince. Is there a settlement requirement for aggregating asynchronous and synchronous payment transactions?
I don't believe it's a requirement. I've looked at the system as more of a gross settlement system, and that any sort of netting or the aggregation would happen at a layer above it. But again, certainly something that we're open to suggestions on.
Okay, everyone. So we are almost out of time. So I'd like to thank you once again for joining us today and for your questions, which always help shape our own thinking as we move forward with this project. We hope today's session gave you a clear understanding of the Bank of Israel's goals surrounding the project and how you can contribute to the technological consultation process. For anyone who wasn't able to join live, or any one of you who'd like to revisit everything we went over today, we definitely hope the recording of this and the Yoav and Vince's presentations will be uploaded to the bank's website within the coming days. As a final reminder as well, the deadline to submit the formal responses is June 30th this year, of course, including a submission format and topic areas are all available on the bank's website. So on behalf of the Digital Shekel team, I'd like to thank you all for joining us again today and have a nice evening.
Thank you, Elliot. Thanks very much, everyone, for being with us.
Recording stopped.